Today I would like to invite you to listen to the Dhammapada of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the 128th verse from the Buddhist scriptures on the YouTube channel Thien Thai in the USA. Not in the sky, nor in mid-ocean, nor in a mountain cave, is found that place on earth where abiding one will not be overcome by death. This verse reminds us of the inevitability of death, the natural law that no being can escape. In the story related to this teaching, there was a wealthy man who believed that his wealth, his distant palaces, and his secluded retreats could protect him from harm and the end of life. He traveled across oceans, climbed remote mountains, and secluded himself in caves, yet he could not escape the universal truth. Death approaches all beings without discrimination. One day, a wise monk visited him and explained that all living beings, regardless of their power, status, or isolation, are subject to the impermanence of life. The monk spoke gently but firmly, explaining that attachment to wealth, possessions, and comfort is futile when facing the inevitability of death. The man reflected deeply and realized that physical distance or hiding cannot alter the natural law. True protection is found not in the external world, but in the cultivation of virtue, mindfulness, and understanding. By practicing ethical conduct, developing generosity, cultivating meditation, and insight, the mind becomes prepared to face death with wisdom, composure, and serenity. This teaching awakens the disciple to the urgency of practice, showing that life is an opportunity to cultivate merit, understanding, and compassion while recognizing that physical avoidance or isolation does not offer refuge from the universal law of impermanence. The verse teaches that death is impartial and unavoidable, transcending wealth, power, and social status. No fortress, mountain, or ocean can shield a person from this truth. The wise monk explained that contemplating death is not meant to instill fear, but to cultivate awareness and urgency in ethical and spiritual practice. Awareness of impermanence motivates the disciple to act mindfully, to restrain harmful behavior, to cultivate virtue, and to practice meditation diligently. Each moment becomes an opportunity for reflection, purification, and the accumulation of merit. By recognizing the inevitability of death, the mind naturally turns toward practice, understanding, and insight. The disciple learns that this awareness is a powerful guide, reminding one to live with intention, cultivate compassion, and develop wisdom in each action, thought, and word. The teaching also emphasizes the importance of internal refuge. The man in the story learned that external conditions cannot prevent death, but cultivating virtue and mindfulness creates a state of inner strength and peace. By practicing ethical conduct, the mind becomes shielded from fear, agitation, and regret. Meditation cultivates clarity and composure, allowing one to observe the mind and understand the impermanent nature of all phenomena. Insight into the nature of life and death deepens. Understanding and liberates the mind from attachment and aversion. This internal refuge is not bound by space or circumstance. It is present wherever the mind is trained with diligence, virtue, and awareness. The disciple realizes that the path of Dharma transforms the perception of life and death, revealing the opportunity to cultivate serenity, clarity, and liberation within each moment. Furthermore, the verse encourages reflection on the urgency of life. The monk taught that since death is inevitable and unpredictable, each moment of life is precious and should be used wisely. Ethical cultivation, mindfulness, and meditation cannot be postponed, for time passes and opportunities diminish. The disciple understands that indulgence in attachment, greed, anger, and delusion only strengthens suffering, whereas cultivating virtue, generosity, patience, and insight produces merit, protects the mind, and prepares one for the final transition. Awareness of impermanence inspires diligence and sincerity in practice, transforming life into a continuous opportunity to purify the mind and accumulate wisdom. Each breath, each intention, each act becomes meaningful as the disciple recognizes that the accumulation of wholesome deeds prepares the mind to face the inevitability of death with peace and understanding. The teaching further reveals the interconnection of impermanence and ethical conduct. Life is fragile and fleeting, and no external refuge can prevent the results of unwholesome actions. The monk explained that ethical living is both a protective measure and a preparation for facing death. Generosity softens attachment, restraint prevents harm, and meditation cultivates composure and insight. By observing and transforming the mind, the disciple experiences freedom from fear, anxiety, and agitation, even in the face of death. Death is not an enemy, but a natural transition, and the trained mind meets it with understanding, equanimity, and clarity. The disciple learns that the inevitability of death is a teacher, guiding one to prioritize virtue, mindfulness, and insight above fleeting external pursuits. The story also illustrates that understanding impermanence cultivates humility and compassion. The wealthy man initially sought protection in isolation, but he realized that no external power could prevent death. The monk encouraged him to turn inward, to cultivate understanding, and to act with compassion toward all beings. Awareness of death fosters empathy, for it reminds the disciple that all beings are subject to the same universal law. By reflecting on impermanence, the mind develops kindness, patience, and generosity, recognizing that each being shares the experience of birth, aging, sickness, and death. The disciple is inspired to act for the welfare of others, knowing that compassionate and ethical deeds contribute to the well-being of self and others, even as the certainty of death approaches. Moreover, the verse teaches that preparation for death is inseparable from spiritual cultivation. The monk emphasized that meditation, insight, and ethical living prepare the mind to meet the inevitable transition with clarity and serenity. Fear, attachment, and agitation are reduced when the mind is trained to recognize impermanence and to cultivate understanding. Life becomes a practice of awakening, where every action, thought, and word shapes the conditions of the mind. The disciple realizes that the inevitability of death is not a reason for despair, but an opportunity to focus on spiritual growth, ethical conduct, and the cultivation of wisdom. By embracing this awareness, the mind develops resilience, composure, and insight, meeting the natural course of life with equanimity. The verse also highlights the universal applicability of the teaching. Death does not discriminate by age, wealth, status, or location. The monk's lesson shows that ethical and spiritual cultivation is essential for all beings, regardless of circumstance. The disciple understands that no external shelter can protect from the inevitability of death. Only inner cultivation provides refuge. By practicing mindfulness, ethical restraint, generosity, and meditation, the mind becomes protected, prepared, and serene. Life becomes an opportunity to cultivate merit and wisdom, and the inevitability of death serves as a reminder to practice diligently, to act ethically, and to develop insight. Finally, the verse encourages the disciple to transform fear of death into motivation for ethical and spiritual practice. The monk taught that awareness of mortality is not a cause for despair, but a guiding principle to live mindfully, cultivate virtue, and develop insight. The disciple learns that every moment is precious, every action matters, and every thought shapes the conditions of the mind. Death is certain, yet ethical living, mindfulness, and insight provide the mind with stability, clarity, and peace. By cultivating these qualities, the disciple develops an internal refuge that is unshaken by external circumstances, understanding that the ultimate liberation arises from ethical practice, meditation, and insight. Awareness of impermanence transforms life into a continuous opportunity for cultivation, awakening, and compassionate action. The disciple who contemplates the 128th verse realizes that death is the one certainty in life, impartial and inevitable, unaffected by wealth, power, or seclusion. The monk in the story emphasized that recognizing the certainty of death is not meant to instill fear, but to awaken wisdom, urgency, and sincere practice. The disciple learns that since death comes to all beings without discrimination, every moment of life becomes precious. Ethical cultivation, mindfulness, and meditation cannot be postponed. Every thought, intention, word, and deed carries the potential to shape future experience, to purify the mind, and to prepare one for the inevitable transition. Understanding impermanence transforms daily life into a continuous opportunity for ethical and spiritual growth, reminding the disciple that life itself is the practice of awakening. The teaching encourages the disciple to observe life with clarity and mindfulness, seeing the impermanence inherent in all phenomena. The monk illustrated that attachment to possessions, status, or comfort is futile in the face of death. The disciple reflects that the body, wealth, family, and all worldly conditions are temporary and cannot provide lasting refuge. True security arises from cultivating virtue, developing insight, and practicing meditation. By observing impermanence and the inevitability of death, the disciple learns to let go of attachment, to act ethically, and to develop compassion for all beings who share the same condition of mortality. Each moment becomes an opportunity to cultivate the qualities that bring peace, clarity, and liberation to the mind. Furthermore, the verse teaches that preparation for death begins with awareness and ethical conduct. The monk explained that living ethically, restraining harmful actions, and practicing generosity and compassion form the foundation of a mind that meets death with serenity. Meditation and insight further stabilize the mind, allowing the disciple to observe the impermanent nature of all things and to release fear, attachment, and delusion. In this way, the inevitability of death is transformed from a source of anxiety into a teacher, guiding the disciple to live with purpose, mindfulness, and understanding. The mind, trained in virtue and insight, becomes a sanctuary where fear, regret, and agitation cannot penetrate. The story also demonstrates the importance of diligence in spiritual practice. the disciple learns that life is uncertain and fleeting, and opportunities to cultivate virtue and insight may not always be available. The monk reminded the man that death can come suddenly, without warning, and that procrastination in practice only increases suffering. By cultivating ethical conduct, mindfulness, and meditation diligently and continuously, the disciple prepares for death and maximizes the potential of each moment for spiritual growth. Every action aligned with virtue, every moment of reflection, and every meditation session strengthens the mind, cultivates merit, and gradually liberates the mind from fear and attachment. The verse highlights the universality of death and impermanence. Mountains, oceans, caves, or distant lands offer no escape from the inevitable transition that all beings face. The monk taught that the mind must be trained to face this reality with understanding and composure. By practicing restraint, generosity, patience, and meditation, the disciple develops internal refuge that is unshaken by external circumstances. Awareness of impermanence fosters humility, reminding the disciple that life is fragile and fleeting, and that all beings are subject to the same natural law. This awareness inspires compassionate action, ethical living, and diligent practice, recognizing that all beings share the experience of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Moreover, the teaching emphasizes the importance of transforming fear of death into motivation for spiritual cultivation. The disciple learns that fear, when guided by understanding, becomes a powerful teacher. Awareness of mortality encourages ethical vigilance, mindful living, and the consistent cultivation of wisdom and compassion. The monk illustrated that death is not an enemy, but a natural law that reminds the mind to awaken. By observing this truth, the disciple develops sincerity in practice, acting ethically and cultivating merit while developing insight into the impermanent nature of life. Each action, each thought, and each moment of mindfulness becomes an instrument of preparation for the inevitable transition. The verse also teaches that ethical cultivation, mindfulness, and meditation create a mind that is free from agitation and fear even in the face of death. The disciple who practices diligently experiences peace and composure, understanding that the inevitability of death cannot harm a mind trained in virtue and insight. The monk explained that ethical and spiritual practice forms the only true refuge, for it is internal, stable, and unshaken by external conditions. By developing awareness of impermanence and the inevitability of death, the disciple strengthens determination to cultivate the mind, reduce attachment, and act with compassion and wisdom. In this way, death becomes a natural transition, approached with clarity and equanimity rather than with fear or avoidance. Furthermore, the story illustrates the importance of reflection and meditation on death. The monk encouraged the disciple to contemplate impermanence daily, observing that all beings are subject to the natural course of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Reflection on mortality fosters detachment from superficial attachments and strengthens ethical and spiritual diligence. Meditation allows the mind to observe impermanence directly, to understand the nature of phenomena, and to release fear and attachment. This contemplative practice deepens insight, cultivates equanimity, and prepares the mind to face death with clarity and serenity. Awareness of death thus becomes a catalyst for the development of wisdom, compassion, and ethical living, transforming fear into understanding and urgency into diligent practice. The verse further highlights the interconnectedness of impermanence and compassion. Recognition of the inevitability of death awakens the disciple to the shared condition of all beings. Just as one cannot escape death, no being can escape the effects of suffering caused by attachment, aversion, and delusion. Awareness of mortality fosters empathy and compassion, inspiring ethical conduct, generosity, and mindful speech. The disciple learns that cultivating virtue benefits both self and others, creating merit, protecting the mind, and preparing for the transition of death with clarity and peace. By embracing impermanence, the mind develops a compassionate perspective, acting for the welfare of all beings who share the same inescapable truth of mortality. Finally, the verse teaches that true refuge is internal and experiential. Mountains, oceans, caves, or distant lands provide no sanctuary from death, but mindfulness, ethical conduct, and insight create a mind that is secure, calm, and free. The monk's guidance shows that the cultivation of virtue, meditation, and understanding transforms fear into composure, attachment into insight, and uncertainty into clarity. Life becomes a continuous practice of awakening, where each thought, word, and action contributes to merit, insight, and preparation for the inevitable transition. Awareness of death transforms life into a sacred opportunity, guiding the disciple to live ethically, act compassionately, and cultivate wisdom, thereby creating a mind that is protected, serene, and prepared for liberation. Thank you for watching my video. Namo Amitba. I wish to bring this merit towards all disciples and sentient beings, all of whom will attain Buddhahood. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your time.